Okay, hi there everyone. Welcome to the third in our series for the virtual festival on nutrition. Today we're going to be covering meal planning, budgeting and batch cooking. Now we've talked a little bit about this over the previous two sessions, kind of touched on different areas, but we're going to look at them in a little bit more detail today. Hopefully I'll give you some more ideas. I've got some resources for you as well that you can download at the end of the session if you'd like to help you with today's information that we're going to be covering. And as usual, there will be the opportunity to do questions and answers at the end if you would like. Okay, so some of you have already been to this session for the previous 2 weeks, so you do know who I am, but just very quickly for those people who haven't met me before. My name's Caroline Collard. I am a qualified nutritionist. I work a lot with people who do healthy lifestyles and also have a keen interest in sports nutrition, as I am also a qualified personal trainer, and I tend to work one-to-one with people doing injury and illness rehabilitation, strength training, and I'm also qualified in sports massage therapy and relaxation massage. I work at the Histon Hub Treatment and Therapy Centre, which is in Histon, and I do lots of one-to-one consultations as well as group things like today's presentation, workshops, courses and webinars. So that's just a little bit about me. Here is a little session overview for what we're going to cover in more detail today. We're going to do a very quick recap on what we talked about last session, just to give a little bit of background for those people who didn't join us. And then we're going to look into some more details about meal planning options and ideas, how to cook on a budget, lots of top tips, hopefully. Batch cooking top tips. Again, I know we kind of covered it a little bit in last week's session, but we're going to have a few more ideas there. And we also last week had a request to add on to our session a little bit more information about grains and greens, grains in particular, and how to use them and what options there are out there. So I've added a little bit on today's session to cover that for that particular request. And then if you would like to ask questions at the end, then I will be available afterwards to do that. Okay, great. So let's get started then. What we're going to do is we're just going to briefly have a look at what we talked about over the last couple of sessions. I've just had the question of where can we access recordings. If you go to the where you booked online on the website or on the app, then you'll be able to find your recordings there. If you can't find them, please feel free to email me. My email address will be on the last slide at the end of the session. Okay, so we've mainly been looking at a lot of different topics over the last few weeks, partly because we want to raise awareness about unhealthy lifestyles and how nutrition can impact kind of different chronic diseases, such as those that you can see in the list there: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, lots of common chronic illnesses, things like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, things like that, but also slightly more unusual ones which perhaps some people wouldn't associate with improving their nutrition, such as fertility issues, having a low immune system, emotional stress, impact on your sleep, for example. So you know, those are the kind of things that we want to be thinking about as of importance to our everyday things that we're choosing to do, which is the food that we're putting into our mouth, and the drinks that we are drinking can also have an impact on some of these chronic diseases as well. So last session in particular, we looked at the benefits of food prepping, and we're going to kind of continue that a little bit today in the topics that we're going to be covering. So the benefits of food prepping, just a kind of overview of what we talked about last week, really were things like saving time, which is obviously really important. We all live really busy lives. It really helps to stick to healthier eating choices when we've got healthy food prepared, ready to go. We don't kind of think, oh well, we won't have that, or we haven't got time to make that today, if you've got it kind of ready and waiting for you. So that's a really great benefit. We talked about how it can reduce your energy bills, which obviously can be really important, particularly at the moment with all of this really cold weather that we're having, but also because obviously energy rates have gone up, so it really can help when you can kind of batch cook and cook a load of things in the oven all in one go, and then not have to necessarily use it again. You're kind of filling your oven with lots of different foods to cook at the same time. For me, this is a really big one. It reduces stress on busy days. So if I'm prepped, if I've got healthy meals ready, literally just to get straight out of the fridge or the freezer to warm up, then I really feel like I'm winning during a busy weekday, particularly if you have a family and children where you've got lots of things going on and you need something quick to eat. Generally, I find it also makes shopping decisions easier when you are prepped, because if you decide exactly what you're going to be having for the week, and you use that as to make your shopping list, and then you go and do your shopping, you know exactly what you've got to get when you get into the supermarket. So that makes life a little bit easier, and also can be quite quick when you're doing your shop. And lastly, it can really help to save money as well. You can really reduce waste when you know exactly what you're going to be cooking and using up throughout the week. So we'll touch a little bit on some of those things as we go along, because they're kind of mix in with the batch cooking side of things that we're going to be looking at. But we're going to start off by talking about meal planning. Now, everybody is different, so I'm going to go through lots of different options for hopefully to cover lots of different people who might be watching this with different lifestyles. So we're going to cover kind of what does it mean by meal planning, what are the different options, why should you do meal planning, and how should you do it, to give you lots of ideas. Now, all of the meal planning templates that I'm going to show you today are available for you to download for free on my website. You can see at the bottom of each of the sheets, my website is carolinecollard.com, and then if you head to the home page and scroll down until you get to the part where you can download all of those templates if you would like to. Okay, so let's move on and start talking a little bit about what does it mean by meal planning. Now, this can mean different things to different people. It really is down to you, your lifestyle, how busy you are. So it's down to you to choose the level of detail that you might be doing a bit of planning. So it might be really detailed, but it might be really, really basic. And I'm going to show you some different ideas so you can decide perhaps which one would work best for you. So if you are extremely busy, then the busier you are, or the less time you have generally, I would say the more beneficial it is that you could do a more detailed plan, because it will benefit you in the long run. So short-term pain in terms of the time it might take you just to plan out your next week, or possibly longer ahead, but long-term gain in terms of the everyday stress and time that's going to save you when you get to kind of making your healthy meals. Okay, so let's have a look at the first few options. So monthly meal planning. Now, this is obviously looking really far ahead, and this does really work for some people who are just extremely busy, find it very difficult, even sometimes at weekends, to find time to sit down and plan the next week and what what the food is going to look like, what your meal is going to look like, things like packed lunches and snacks for the children, that kind of thing. So you may feel that actually once a month you can sit down for a block of time and think, right, I'm going to plan out my whole month. So you can see here there's an option of a monthly meal planner. So you've got your different weeks throughout. You can start whichever day of the week, obviously, that month starts on, using your planner, and you've got options to separate out breakfast, lunch and dinner if you want to. Now, this seems like a lot of organisation looking ahead at the whole month, but what you have to remember, and again we've touched on this in previous sessions, is that you don't have to have a different dinner every single night of that month. It may be that you have your 5 favourite meals, or you might have maybe 10 over the whole month, and you just circulate throughout those 10 healthy favourite meals that you've got, and those you just add in throughout the month, but you will come back to them again within that same month. Lunches equally don't have to be really specific. So it might be that one week you buy a pack of pita breads, and each lunch is a pita bread based lunch. So you put pitas with fillings, for example, but it might be the next week that you choose some whole grain wraps. that might be your next one. The next week might be, I've bought a bag of bulgur wheat, and I'm going to go over what bulgur wheat is later when we get to our grain section. And you might say, right, you know, bulgur wheat salads this week for lunch. So it doesn't have to be super detailed, because you can just kind of have what is the basis of that meal for that day, and then you can just add bits and bobs that are in the fridge as you go along to that particular meal. So you could plan out, you know, monthly if you are extremely busy and you think, actually this is really going to just keep me on track, and it's, you know, I only have to kind of plan it once a month. So that might be an option for some people. Alternatively, there is just the weekly meal plan. And again, this could be at different levels of detail. So this one that I've got here for you is a weekly meal plan, but it also includes a little section for writing a shopping list. So this is relatively similar to what I might do once a week. I've got obviously my days of the week. I've split up a little section for breakfast, lunch and dinner, Monday to Friday to Sunday, and then I've got a little section from my shopping list. So what I would decide first of all is I would decide my main dinners for the week. So I'd write my dinners in for the week, and then I would add to my shopping list, okay, what are the ingredients that I'm going to need to make those dinners this week. Again, lunches could and breakfast could be as detailed or as kind of basic as you like. So again, it could be pitta lunch, you know, a bulgur wheat salad lunch. Breakfast could just be, if you're someone who likes your oats, so you could have just overnight oats with frozen fruit, for example, and you can choose a different bag of frozen fruit each week that you buy from the supermarket, and you pop a handful of whichever you fancy on that morning into your overnight oats. Or it could be a toast based one, it could just be a kind of fruit based one, avocado on toast, that kind of thing. So you can keep it as simple, or if you like to do it detailed and you really want it super detailed, that's also up to you. If it really, you know, you have to decide what level of detail and help that is going to really benefit you on a daily basis. And then obviously once you've kind of planned that all out and you've got all of the ingredients into your shopping list, you've got a super easy shop to do, whether you order online or whether you go round to the supermarket. Now I'm going to come back to that idea of the difference between shopping online and going to a supermarket a bit later on, when we talk about some of our top tips for budgeting. Another option is what I might call a daily meal plan and food ideas. So this is quite nice if you want to keep it relatively loose. It looks like it could be detailed, but actually this is quite a, one of the more basic ways in which you can plan. So again, you've got your days of the week, and in each day, I think I mentioned this on our previous two sessions, you could just be as basic as writing in what is the main dinner going to be for that day, because for most people, that's actually the part which they struggle with, particularly if they're kind of struggling with time at the end of a day when it's really busy, or when you get home late from work, for example. So it might be that you just decide, I'm just going to plan out dinners for the week. So you might put the names of your dinners in those larger sections, and then you might decide just to put some ideas of things that you're going to have in the house for breakfast, lunch, snacks, and maybe anything that you might want to prepare ahead. So that little section at the bottom, prepare ahead list, might be things that you've prepped maybe at the weekend before, or you want to prep at the weekend before your week begins. So for example, you might chop up some raw veg. We talked about this in our food prep session last week. It might be that you have cooked some grains, cooked some legumes, just done a little bit of prep for some of those main meals that you've put in that dinner planner there. And your breakfast, lunch and snack ideas again can just be, you know, a variety of different ideas that you have that you thought you've seen before. Maybe it was recipes or just suggestions for different healthy options. So at least when you get to that point where you've got to make those meals or snacks, you've got them in front of you. Maybe you keep them on your fridge, or you can take a picture of it and keep it on your phone, for example. And then you've got them in front of you, rather than just getting to that point where you just can't, you know, you're in a rush and you can't think of what to make, what to do, what to grab to take out with you, and you end up reaching for something that perhaps is a bit more processed or a less healthy option because it's just convenient. Actually, if you've got those ideas written right in front of you, it's much easier to make that decision to choose something healthier, because you don't even have to think about it, because it's written down in front of you. So that's the idea behind that daily meal planner. And you don't, again, actually have to fill it in for the whole week. You might decide, right, I'm going to choose what we're going to have on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday for dinners, and then I'll see where we are in terms of what ingredients we have left in the fridge, etc., etc., and I'll kind of decide on Wednesday night, and then I'll plan out the rest of the week. So you might decide to do it, as I say, more on a daily basis or every few days instead, if that suits you best. Now, there is also, for those people who have other people who perhaps could be responsible for helping you to either meal plan, do the cooking, or you are just interested in getting perhaps your children, whatever age really, to start helping out at home a little bit more. You know, you can plan out a little bit of an idea of who's going to help. So almost a bit like some people plan out what chores are going to be done in your household throughout the week. So if you feel you need a little bit more support yourself, you could have something like the family dinner plan. So again, it would just be, what are the main meals for the week, Monday to Sunday, that we're going to have for dinners, or at the weekend you might have more of a main meal at a lunchtime, for example. So popping down in the first box, what are you going to cook? Secondly, who is going to do the actual cooking? Is it going to be yourself, or are you going to be nominating different people within your family to do that main cooking? And then maybe kind of allocating a sous chef, if you like, for who is helping with that meal. So it might be you get someone to do some of the chopping and prepping for that meal, and the other person is actually cooking. Or it might just be other things, you know, collecting the ingredients, or, you know, switching jobs each time so that everybody kind of helps out in different ways. So that can be quite helpful for families as well, to make sure that the burden isn't always just on one person to do everything, and it gets the family involved together. It's a nice way to bring people together at the end of a day to, you know, do something but also talk about your day, which is quite nice. And it gives children a bit more responsibility and can teach them lots of skills as well in the kitchen as you go along. Okay, so moving on to cooking on a budget. So I've got a few top tips that I want to talk to you about here. Again, I know we've covered the odd thing in the previous sessions. So the first thing, obviously, you can save money by buying in bulk. So different options, obviously, in the supermarkets. You can buy certain ingredients in bulk, but you can also order online sometimes, buying in bulk. Plus, if you have a discount card for anywhere, or a membership card, sorry, for places like Booker, which we have one in Cambridge, they sell things in bulk, and you know, you really can save where possible. It's similar for using coupons, vouchers and special offers. So in the supermarket, obviously, when we see special offers, you know, 2 for 1, 3 for 2, buy one get one free, all of those things, those are absolutely great and there's nothing wrong with them. But the only thing which I try to raise awareness of when it comes to things like that is just make sure that you're not drawn in to those offers when it comes to the unhealthier options. Obviously, you know, certain things are cheap anyway, lots of processed foods, but you can also obviously make it cheaper by buying them when they have those special offers. Just beware, try not to get sucked into the offers too much when it is some of those unhealthier options, even though it might seem cheaper. You know, look out for lots of special offers with lots of healthy whole foods where possible. One of the things I like to do sometimes is try to make sure that I go to reduced sections, and also at times where they discount the food. Now, you will see in the reduced items sections, as you can see in that picture on the screen there, sometimes, particularly in the fruit and veg, there's loads of things in there, and then you look at the price, and actually sometimes if you're there during the day, I'm a little bit disappointed as to how much they've actually reduced it. Whereas I know that when you normally get between about 7 and 8 p.m. in the evenings, they do the massive reduction. So I have been to the supermarkets where they have reduce those big sections where they still have lots and lots of kind of fresh fruit and veg in there. And I've been buying bags of fruit or tubs of things for about 10p each, which is absolutely brilliant and absolutely saved a fortune. Some of them are things like the prepared bags of vegetables. So sometimes you might be able to buy really cheap bags of the pre-prepared carrot swede mix, for example, cut butternut squash, sweet potatoes, and those kind of things. Actually, what I do with those is I buy them and then I pop them in the freezer because they're already chopped for me, and then I tend to get them out of the freezer when I need them for things like making stocks, popping into stews, curries, anything that's cooked in a kind of one pot type scenario. They are absolutely brilliant for those, and you can make a real saving on those veg when they really reduce them. And to be honest, I say 10p, but sometimes I've been in and done a shop and bought a whole bag of things for about 30p, where some things have just been reduced to 1, 2, 3p. So it's really worth, if you can, every now and then finding out what time your local supermarket does their reductions, and pop in at that time. As I say, it's normally around between 7 and 8 p.m. depending on the supermarket that you shop at. So that is one really good reason sometimes to actually go and shop in store rather than doing an online shop all the time if you really are trying to shop on a budget, because popping in at that time can be really, really beneficial. I also sometimes use apps such as Olio. You can see a picture of it. It's a free app that you can download, and it's a great food sharing app. So basically, some of the shops, again, when they do reduce some of their items, or it gets to the end of the day and some products still haven't been bought at their reduced prices, you can log on to Olio, and there are certain what they call food heroes who will go and collect some of these foods from the supermarkets at the end of the day, or sometimes even the smaller local shops as well are involved, and they will put them on your local area, and you can message those people to say, yes, I'd like that, can I come and collect it from you, and arrange to come and collect those items. So occasionally I will have a little look on an app like Olio and think, right, is there anything that's kind of going that people are given away, and that's generally for free the whole time. So that is a really great thing to do in your local area. Obviously, when you do certain things like the things we've been covering over the last few sessions, such as sticking to your shopping list, meal planning, and then batch cooking, can all save you money because you are really not wasting anything. You're using up everything that you plan to, and you're not buying food that's going to go to waste, is going to go off, and so you really can save a lot just by making sure that you're just buying what you really need each week. I've also put on there, love your freezer. I've talked about this before. I love kind of either buying fresh food and freezing it to use later, particularly if it's been reduced, or making sure that I buy additional things each week just in case I think I might run out of something, but I've always got something in the freezer ready. Freezer food, freezer veg in particular, so frozen sweet corn, peas, broccoli and cauliflower, mixed veg, frozen fruit, all really great to just kind of add to a meal whenever you kind of run out of your fresh foods. But also they're not that expensive and can be a lot cheaper than buying fresh. And we did talk about the benefits of having frozen foods sometimes in comparison to some fresh items, where actually nutrition can be slightly better in those frozen items where they've been frozen at source, and retained a little bit more of their vitamins and minerals compared to the fresh items, which might have been traveling a lot and sat on the supermarket shelves with contact with the air, which can reduce their nutrition content. So I do love my freezer, and I will kind of stock that up as often as possible to make sure I've got extra things in, which, as I say, are going to be a bit cheaper and will save me money on having to always go out and buy everything fresh all of the time. And lastly, using cheap yet nutritious ingredients. We're going to come back to those when we have a look at grains and greens shortly. Cheap doesn't have to mean processed. A lot of the time nowadays we do associate with cheaper items being the processed items because they can obviously be mass produced. and they put preservatives in them which are going to make them last a lot longer on our shelves, yet they're just not very nutritious. Obviously you can get nutrition out of them, but you're going to really get the benefits from whole foods as much as possible. So we'll have a look at some of those cheaper yet really nutritious ingredients. Okay, before we do that, we're just going to have a quick talk about batch cooking. Okay, now we talked a lot about food prepping in the last session, and this is very similar, but I have a few extra kind of top tips about how to go about doing this. So we did look last session at some of the things which I might use in my household to help with batch cooking, such as pictures you can see there with the slow cooker, or using an instant pot, which might have a variety of different functions like steaming. You can also bake in them, you can saute in them, they're a pressure cooker, so you can get those all in ones, or you can just get your basic slow cooker. Now for batch cooking, where you are cooking large amounts of food all in one go, so that you can then freeze them or keep some of them, some kind of portions in the fridge for the rest of the week, for your meals to save time later down the week. You know, using a slow cooker is really great, because you can pop it all in one, you know, just all your ingredients, pop it in one pot, and leave it, and then come back to it nearer to the end of the day. Perhaps you've been at work and you can come home to that being ready, and you can, depending on the size of slow cooker that you've got, you can buy them in various sizes, and you can get a lot cooked in one batch. And as I said, if you were someone who was planning out your monthly meals, and you were someone who really wanted to plan ahead and do those monthlies, this is a great way to kind of do that, because if you've got the same meal planned maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the month, then you can kind of cook those 3 or 4 meals, batch cook them all in one go, and then pop them into the freezer. Now when you have done some batch cooking, and that can be, you can see on the list there, about halfway down, cooking whole meals if you want to, which you can see in some of the pictures there, or it might just be cooking the individual ingredients separately. So for example, I talked about last week in our food prep session, cooking up a big batch of grains. For example, you cook lots of brown rice, for example, as one thing that you could do. You could cook up a load of Mediterranean vegetables in the oven. Maybe you'll cook some chicken or some salmon, which you can then either freeze or keep some of it ready for the next couple of meals. Or you could cook things like legumes, you know, cook a batch of lentils or some chickpeas or some black beans, for example, and again you could freeze some and keep some in pots in your fridge. So batch cooking doesn't have to mean you cook whole meals all the time. It could just mean you do a bit of more prep work and you batch cook certain ingredients, of which some of them can go into containers in the freezer and some of them could go into containers in your fridge ready for that week, so that you've got them to hand ready to put into a meal. So rather than having to cook everything from scratch, if you haven't actually planned for that day or the next day, then you can just grab those ingredients, and it's a case of really just popping them together and heating them up, which really will save you time as well. But here are my top tips if you are going for big meals and your batch cooking meals. You can see in one of the images some Ziploc bags with those meals in. Now, you can use tubs, and I've talked a lot about using containers with lids as well, but they can use up a little bit more space. So if you're lacking in space in your freezer in particular, or you want to keep some in your smaller freezer section and fit more in, using reusable Ziploc bags are really, really great, because what you can do is you can also portion them out for 1 portion per person, depending on whether, you know, you live on your own or you're in a family. Actually, sometimes you might eat different things at the same time. So actually you can portion them out into the Ziploc bags and they fit flat. You can kind of flatten them out and stack them on top of each other in the freezer. And you really will save space. So that's a really great one. And then obviously you can just wash the bags out and then reuse them again another time. So, you know, Ziploc bags can be a really great tip for those batch cooking sessions, and you can see exactly what you've got, because obviously they're see-through. You can look in your freezer and you can kind of choose what you want, and again, you might have something different to other people in your family, and you can choose different things, but you've all got a really nutritious meal to eat. The other thing is ice cube trays. Now, I use ice cube trays to keep herbs, sauces, stocks, and gravy in. So let's say I made a gravy or a stock for a roast dinner on a Sunday, and I've got leftover gravy or stock. Don't throw it away. If you think you're going to use it, obviously, the next day on a meal that you've planned, great, absolutely fine, pop it in the fridge, use it again. But don't waste even smaller things such as sauces, and also maybe herb mixes. Maybe you've kind of made your own pesto or anything like that. Use things like ice cube trays, fill them up with the leftovers, and then pop those ice cube trays into the freezer. Now, whenever then you have a meal where you just need maybe a condiment to give you a bit of extra flavor, you can just pop one of those ice cubes out into that meal that you're cooking, and it's a really quick way to get a healthy option. So again, rather than kind of buying something that has added preservatives or sugar or salt in them, because they will last longer that way, actually, if you've made something yourself and you've got leftovers, it could be even things like, you know, tomato passata from a jar, or other kind of sauces that you've made that have come with any sort of meal, and also herbs. If you've got fresh herbs that you think are going to go off but you're not going to use them, again, don't throw them away. Use maybe some scissors to chop them into small little pieces, or you can kind of chop them on the chopping board. Put them into different sections within an ice cube tray. Fill the rest of the tray up with some water and then freeze those, and you've got an automatic kind of lovely herby flavor that you can just pop out one at a time if you need them to add flavor to any future meals that you're going to have. So that is a really great kind of top tip for saving anything like that. Don't throw away your sauces or leftover herbs, spices, gravies, etc. Try to save them and use them again. Obviously, I did say already, you know, you can pre-cook grains, veggies, legumes as well, and keep those separately. You can also put those in the Ziploc bags and have them as portions ready for meals. But the only thing I would say about when you are freezing things, particularly if it's just leftovers or if it is certain fruit and veg, try to avoid some foods that don't reheat well, or that you perhaps know that you won't like when they are reheated. So, for example, obviously, if you do put, just being aware, if you do put things like fresh berries or lots of fresh fruit, and then you actually think, oh, this is going to go off, I'm going to just freeze it, be aware of how that will change when you reheat it or when you defrost those. They're not going to be obviously fresh. I do actually, and my children do actually love eating frozen fruit. So if we have leftovers, sometimes, let's say we had some bananas that were going off, if you chop that banana into slices, and you can either kind of lay them out on the tray and freeze them, and then pop them into a tub once they're frozen so they don't all stick together too much, and then you can get them out, defrost them just a tiny little bit so they're still quite solid, and they're a lovely snack, particularly in the summer when you're looking for something cold. So it's a bit like having an ice cube, but actually you've got a lovely piece of frozen banana, and that's almost, you know, it makes it really sweet and delicious as a snack. So that is a top tip for those, but they don't obviously kind of behave a lot in the same way. So think about how things might reheat, whether it's worth freezing certain things or not. Okay, so I did say that I was going to add on a section all about grains and greens today. Grains in particular I'm going to focus on. So grains are amazing, and one of the things I want to talk about in terms of grains and why I mention it the most is because what we tend to do, and we mentioned this in the last session, last two sessions really, about trying to improve the diversity within our diets. It's really important for gut health, and we talked about in our food for mood session how our gut is really linked to our brain health and also just our general physical health. The gut has often been labelled in more recent times as the second brain. We know that we have this big connection via the vagus nerve, gut-brain axis, it might also be labelled, which, the foods we eat and the impact of the nutrition that is coming from those foods and how it has an impact not only on our mood, but our general health, our mental health, is really important. But what we tend to do is we tend to restrict the diversity of foods that we are eating, because we tend to get set in our ways. We have certain habits. There's certain foods that we really like to eat or find easier to cook and use in certain meals, and we tend to stick to those. And the most common grains globally, there's only really kind of three main ones which I use the most, which is white rice, corn, and wheat. So obviously rice is used generally just for meals, but can be added to things. But corn is used a lot. You will find it in lots of additives. You've probably heard of corn syrup that is used as a sweetener in lots of things. Obviously, you can get bread products like wraps, corn wraps, for example, that will be used in, but it's also used as a sweetener in beverages, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages. Corn gets into a lot of things. And then wheat, which obviously is kind of in the UK, one of our most common grains, you will find in so many of our bread-based products. So, I do talk about using things like pita breads and wraps, and obviously you might have things like seeded bread, but obviously the majority of them are wheat based, and so therefore you're not getting a massive diversity in terms of your grains. So although I do like to use things like wholemeal pittas, wholemeal wraps as a kind of more convenient, easier option for making things like packed lunches, I do really try to mix it up with having lots of whole grains in my diet, either as part of my dinners, or I mentioned earlier, I might use some of these grains to kind of make whole food salads, where that makes up the bulk of my meal with lots of veggies and other condiments, instead of having something like a wrap or a pita bread. So, it's really nice to diversify, because you just get so many different benefits from the vitamins and minerals. So you can see from that list on the screen there, particularly with grains, they are a great source of so many things. Yes, protein, carbohydrates, and of course fiber, which is really important, but also grains will have a nice mixture of B vitamins, vitamin E, zinc, magnesium, selenium, phosphorus, potassium, and many other trace elements as well. And as I mentioned already, it's really important, where possible, to try and eat them in their whole form regularly, rather than in a processed form like in a bread product, because variety is key, and you will just get all of the benefit of those vitamins and minerals the less you process an item. Greens, similarly, are very good sources of all sorts of vitamins and minerals, and I try to make sure that I get kind of greens into my diet every day, and I'll talk about what some of those greens might be in a moment. But greens can be a really good, obviously, source of fibre, just like with the grains as well, but it really gives you lots of different fibres, soluble and insoluble fibre. So soluble fibre, where you're going to get all of those vitamins and minerals that you can see listed underneath, such as vitamin A, C, K, minerals such as iron, calcium, iodine, copper, and again lots of other trace elements, but also lots of insoluble fibre as well, which isn't going to be fully digested in the upper part of your gut and the nutrition taken out, but actually is used by your good gut microbes that I've mentioned in those last two sessions, and they're going to use some of that to feed themselves, and they're going to proliferate, and they're going to use it to benefit your health. So they will feed on that, and obviously great source of fibre to help keep things moving in your body, which is really, really important. And with the greens, it's really nice to try and get a mixture of both raw and steamed greens, and the darker those greens are, the better, because as I said, variety is key within your diet. So the darker ones might be things like your dark kale, and there's various different kinds of kale that you can get, or dark cabbages, so you can get some of those darker option cabbages. And then you can have other greens, you know, some of those lighter ones. There's different kinds of cabbages. You can have the purple cabbage as well, which I would still kind of cover under that area, even though they're not green. But you can also have broccoli and asparagus, and you know, there are so many. And I talked earlier about there being the cheaper options, and grains and greens are cheap, nutritious options. Obviously, there are some of those ingredients, for example, asparagus, which aren't going to be as cheap. It's better to perhaps buy them when they're in season more within the UK. You might get them slightly cheaper price, particularly if you go to markets and things like that. But otherwise, other greens, all the different cabbages and kales and things like that, broccoli, cauliflower, all really kind of much cheaper options to go for. So I always try and make sure I've got at least kind of one form of cabbage and kale and broccoli each week in my diet, and I try and do a different one each week where possible as well. So variety is key. I'm just going to move on now to looking specifically at grains, because this was the request that I had at the end of last week's session, and how we might use those. So I'm just going to introduce a few. Some of them you'll recognise, some of them you might not recognise or even heard of before. I've chosen these ones because they are more readily available in all of our supermarkets now. So all of the big supermarkets, you will find all of these options. Some of the smaller options, like Aldi and Lidl, you will find most of them, but perhaps not all of them. But I know, for example, in Tesco and Sainsbury's that I've checked, and places like Asda, all of these have been available. It's a case of looking for them in the aisles. Sometimes not all of the grains are together, and you have to look in your kind of world food aisles and slightly different areas to find what you're looking for. But it's always worth asking where you might find those, so that you know where to find them in your main supermarkets. So what we've got here for our grains are things like buckwheat, and what I've done is I've put a picture for the majority of what they look like dry and what they look like cooked, because they can be slightly different or look slightly different. So at least you know what they'll look like in your supermarket packaging when you go and collect them from the supermarket. So we've got buckwheat, which is a lovely option. I really love it. It's a kind of almost got a nutty flavour. Obviously it doesn't have nuts in it, but it kind of gives that kind of nutty flavour, and it's really quite chunky. We've got our rice. Now I put a real selection of the different rices that are available in all of the supermarkets. There are so many, so try where possible to go for other versions apart from your white or even your brown rice all the time. We have wild rice, we have red rice, we have black rice. There are a real variety in our supermarkets now. So again, it's not just about the fact that we should perhaps be eating those that perhaps have more nutrition in them and have been less, the least amount of processing. So white rice is obviously the most processed option, and the others, the darker they get in particular, the less processed they are, the more whole food they are as such, and contain more nutrition. But it's, again, variety is key. So switch it up. If you like white rice, that's fine, have it every now and then, but perhaps think about the diversity within your diet. There are so many other choices, and all you've got to do is switch it out for a different option every time you buy another pack of rice at the supermarket. Bulgur wheat is lovely option. I really like bulgur wheat because it's so quick. So those of you who perhaps use something like couscous as a quick option, as an alternative, remember that couscous isn't actually a grain. It's technically a bit like pasta that's been chopped up into tiny pieces, so it is even more processed. So you're getting much more of a processed option when you buy something like couscous, even where it's the whole grain one, rather than the kind of the white one, if you like. So something like bulgur wheat, which is slightly processed, it's been chopped in half, the wheat's been kind of chopped in half, but it is much quicker to cook, and it is more whole grain, if you like, than something like your couscous. So it's less processed, and you can put it in a bowl, a bit like couscous, cover it with hot water, and just leave it for slightly longer than couscous would. It takes a little bit longer. Let the water soak in. If it all soaks soaks up, you can top it up with some hot water from the kettle and just leave that to soak until it's soaked up all the water. If you find it needs a little bit of extra cooking, you could always pop it in the microwave for 5 minutes. But otherwise, generally, you can just, if you've got the time, you can kind of just leave that hot water to soak into bulgur wheat. And it's a lovely, fluffy grain that you can use to have as a bulk of a base of a salad, for example. You can have it hot, you can have it cold. It's great for taking on the go for packed lunches, but equally it's nice to have hot as a main meal as well, with other things added to it. Quinoa, I'm sure probably most of you have now heard of quinoa. It has become a lot more popular. It is a really great option if you are looking to, if you're kind of more plant-based, for example. It does increase the amount, it's got an increased amount of protein in it. So it is a kind of complete protein, if you will. Again, that cooks really quickly and easily. Like most of these grains, they all cook in relatively similar ways. It's just a case of immersing them in hot water and then gently simmering the water until it is cooked through. Now, obviously, you do want to keep an eye on it. You don't want it to always perhaps go too stodgy and to take on too much water. I'm sure we've all done that once or twice with our rice before, where we've just perhaps put a bit too much water in and let it boil for too long, and then it's gone a bit too stodgy. So it is important, perhaps, if you like to make sure it's not overdone, to keep an eye on it. But again, it's just a case if you can top the water up to just above where the grain is, either in your pan, or if you're cooking in something like it, you can cook this in a slow cooker as well, or an instant pot, and then just keep an eye on it, keep topping that water up as it starts to absorb into the grain, and then just keep checking it every now and then to make sure that it hasn't kind of taken on too much water, hasn't gone too soft, and you've got a little bit of texture still there with it. Barley is an absolute kind of British staple, and I think we actually use it a lot less than we used to do. You've probably seen it being used a lot more in things like soups. They are still great. They add a real nice kind of texture to a chunky winter soup. And obviously you can cook it in the stock that you're using to make that soup, along with other vegetables, for example. Takes a little bit longer to cook than some of the other grains, probably relatively similar to cooking rice. But again, I absolutely love this, and it is packed with vitamins and minerals, and is a really great, and it's just so cheap. Lots of these grains are relatively cheap, but barley in particular is one of those ones that's even cheaper than most of those on the screen. So, you know, I really recommend it in terms of nutrition, in terms of it being great for cooking on a budget, and for adding kind of that really nice chunky texture, not only to soups and stews and casseroles and things like that, but as you can see, you could make a salad out of it. You could eat it cold. You don't have to have it hot. You can add other veg to it, the greens that you can get into your diet every day to it. You could add something like, as you can see on there, something like feta cheese to it, or some chopped tofu, and that would be a really great option. So, you know, it's got lots of possibilities, all of these grains really, to have hot or cold. Now, the one that I've added onto the bottom of the page there, which I think is the one that's going to be least well known by most people, is freekeh. So I discovered freekeh a few years ago. I was buying it in whole food shops. But nowadays you can buy it in your main supermarket. So I've seen it regularly in Tesco and Sainsbury's and things. And it is a really unusual, great alternative grain. The size of it is very similar to a rice, and I use it like rice, as I would with, you know, think about where you'd have rice with a meal. You can use freekeh in exactly the same way. This one has, again, it's a bit like the buckwheat. It's got a slightly different, maybe slightly nuttier flavour, but it's almost got a smoky taste to it as well, kind of slightly unusual, very different to most of the other grains. So if you're looking to try something new, to try something different, freekeh is a really, really great option to try. So again, if you're not sure where to find it in your supermarket, do just go and ask someone who works in the supermarket to show you where you might find it. I know Tesco definitely kind of have sold this more recently, as I have bought it from them. So do go and try some different grains. There's lots of different options there for you to try. And again, it doesn't have to be that you just go away from all of the things that you like cooking. Okay, if you like having rice regularly, that's absolutely fine. But just try to add a bit more diversity. And there's no right or wrong as to how to use these grains in certain meals. They all cook in very similar ways. So think about how you would cook some rice. You're going to cook all of these grains in a very similar way to that. So that's not going to be kind of anything in terms of difficulty for choosing something different, and it's a case of just using them in a very similar way to, as I say, that you perhaps would for rice, or if you often use couscous, just use a different grain instead, so it doesn't have to be used in any different way. But I do have a couple of ideas for ways in which you could use some of those grains on the next slide here. So here are some ideas. Now, I know those of you who've joined me for the last couple of sessions will know that I love a Buddha bowl. So the bowl that you can see there with all the different things in, this is how I use a lot of my grains, particularly for lunches and dinners. And I will kind of cook some of these up, different grain each week, try to have something different to keep the variety, and then just add lots of different fresh or cooked veg, and lots of different kind of condiments there. You can see some avocado with that one, but it could be that you just kind of drizzle the whole thing with balsamic vinegar, or you've got some leftover passata, or you kind of use some of those condiments we talked about last week, such as nuts and seeds and things like that sprinkled over the top. So I love adding a different grain to my Buddha bowls each week. In the middle at the top there, you can see things like chili, which we talked about as an option last week. So if you're making something, it could be a one-pot meal like a chili or a curry, and then you'll add your grain with that along with some additional veg. That's a great way to use a grain. You can also see there some quinoa burgers. I've actually got the recipe on my website. Again, you can access some of the recipes that I have put there for you from the homepage. Just scroll down and look through my recipe selection, and the quinoa burgers are in there, so have a little look at those. Again, super easy to make, just a case of cooking up some of the quinoa. And again, if you've done some batch cooking and you've got some cooked quinoa, you can make these burgers super quick just by getting out that cooked quinoa, putting it perhaps in a blender, or mixing it together in a bowl with some other ingredients, and then just popping them into your oven or into your air fryer. It really can be extremely quickly, particularly if you've batched cook. Now, underneath in the middle, you can also see another savoury option, which is a stuffed pepper. I know it's a bit kind of old school, but I love a stuffed pepper. So use those grains. So let's say you've got some leftover grains that you've cooked, you've got some peppers in, cut the tops off those peppers, pop out the seeds, stuff them with some grains, some veggies, some condiments. Maybe you've got some kidney beans or something like that left over. Pop it all in, pop some of those flavours in, maybe put in something like some onion or some spring onion and some garlic, and cook them in the oven. Or again, if you've got something like an air fryer, you can pop it in there. You can even pop these in your slow cooker. I know, absolutely brilliant. And then don't forget, you can also use grains for pudding and snack options. So you can see your classic rice pudding down there. You do not have to use a classic rice pudding rice, so your white rice or even a risotto rice, for example, to make something like that. You can use different grains. So don't be scared to go outside of the norm of making something that you like eating, but perhaps could change up the variety of the grains that you're using to make that particular thing. Something like rice pudding could be made with the buckwheat, for example, is a great idea. The quinoa as well works quite well. And I also use alternative grains for breakfast. So if those of you who like a oaty breakfast, for example, you like your overnight oats or your porridge, switch it up instead. Soak your overnight oats, and instead of doing the oats, switch it up for one of the other grains. Try it and know it will be slightly different, but it's a really great way to get a different kind of grain into your diet. You can put the same things with it. So if you do an overnight oats and you add frozen fruit to it in the morning, or some fresh fruit, do exactly the same thing with a different grain. It might feel strange at first, but not something that perhaps you won't like, it can be really, really delicious to have something, and quite just nice to mix it up and do something different to normal. Also on the bottom of the screen there, you can see a little snack option. Those are my oaty bites that I make. Again, I think I've put my recipe on the website, and my kids love making this. I often post this on my social media, but we also use other grains as well as oats. So again, if you've run out of oats, or you've got some cooked grains, you've got some quinoa left over, you can make my oaty bites using an alternative grain instead, just adding some fruit to it, rolling them up together in the ball. So you want to kind of make sure the grain is a little bit sticky so they stick together. You can add things like banana to it, but do look up the recipe again on my website if you're interested in making some of those. You can then put them in the fridge or the freezer, and then you can get them out for snacks anytime. Really great option, but you don't have to use oats. You can use another type of grain. So we're getting to the end of the session now, and I just want to remind you from earlier when we were looking at all of those different meal planning templates, if you're interested in kind of downloading one for free, I've got all of those templates on my website. So just head to carolinecollard.com. On the homepage, scroll down, and you will find a little section that looks like that with all of the different options. You've just got to click on each one to download them for free. You might just decide that you're going to use them once or twice just to get the hang of things, and then you might just have a notepad, or keep it simple, any piece of paper. You don't have to print off my specific ones. It sometimes just helps people get organized at the beginning, to get things rolling in terms of being a bit more planned for the rest of your week or for your month. As I say, if you are a particularly busy person and need to plan well ahead. Please do contact me if you have any further questions after this session, or if you are interested in making a booking for a consultation with me. You can also follow me on social media at Caroline Collard Health, and where I work at the Histon Health Hub in Histon. It's been so great to see some more people who have joined us for the last two sessions, and I hope to see you for our last session next week, where we'll kind of cover a couple of new different things and new things that we haven't done so far, but also it will give us a chance to have just a little recap on everything that we've done. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then those of you who are interested in asking some questions, feel free to stay behind and pop them into the chat, or come on and chat to me live. Okay, so